I never imagined that walking into work on a Tuesday morning would be the day my entire career would implode right before my eyes. My name is Sarah, and for 8 years I poured my heart and soul into Thompson Marketing Group, climbing from a junior account coordinator to senior director of client relations. I had just closed the biggest deal in our company's history, a $3 million contract with a tech giant that everyone said was impossible to land. I was on top of the world, until I wasn't. That morning started like any other. I grabbed my usual coffee from the shop downstairs, exchanged pleasantries with the security guard who always asked about my weekend, and rode the elevator to the 15th floor, humming along to the music playing in my head. The office was buzzing with its typical energy, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the smell of fresh coffee mixing with the faint scent of printer ink. But something felt different. I noticed people averting their eyes as I walked past their desks. My assistant, Marcus, looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read, pity mixed with something else, maybe anger. Before I could even set my bag down, my boss, Richard Thompson, called me into his office. Richard and I had a solid working relationship, or so I thought. He was the founder's son, inherited the company 5 years ago, and while he wasn't the most brilliant strategist, he generally stayed out of our way and let us do our jobs. As I walked into his corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, I noticed someone else was already there, a woman I'd seen around the office recently, Alexandra Monroe. She was relatively new, hired about 6 months ago as a marketing associate, entry-level position, fresh out of college with minimal real-world experience. Richard didn't waste time with pleasantries. He told me to sit down, his voice carrying none of its usual warmth. Then he dropped the bomb. He was restructuring my department, and I was being moved from senior director to associate director, a demotion that came with a significant pay cut and loss of my team. And who would be taking over my position? Alexandra, who was sitting there with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, pretending to look sympathetic while her fingers drummed excitedly on the armrest of her chair. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, my mouth went dry and my heart started racing. I asked Richard if this was some kind of joke, reminded him about the massive contract I'd just secured, about the 8 years of dedication, the countless weekends and late nights, the clients who specifically requested to work with me. He gave me some corporate nonsense about taking the company in a new direction, needing fresh perspectives, and how this wasn't personal, just business. But I could see it in his eyes, the way he couldn't quite hold my gaze, the slight flush creeping up his neck. This was absolutely personal. Over the following weeks, everything became crystal clear. Richard and Alexandra weren't just colleagues, they were having an affair, and not even a particularly discreet one. I'd see them leaving together, sharing intimate glances across conference rooms, her hand lingering on his arm just a bit too long during meetings. The worst part was watching her fumble through responsibilities she had no business handling. Clients started complaining. The team I'd built and mentored for years was frustrated and confused. Alexandra would show up to crucial presentations unprepared, using buzzwords without understanding what they meant, making promises to clients that were impossible to keep. One afternoon, I overheard her in the break room telling another employee that she'd always known she was destined for leadership, that some people just have natural talent that transcends experience. I stood there holding my lukewarm coffee, watching this person who'd been in the industry for less than a year dismiss everything I'd worked for as if it meant nothing. That's when something inside me shifted. I'd been wallowing in anger and self-pity, but suddenly I felt this strange calm wash over me. I realized I had two choices. I could either let this destroy me, or I could take control of my own narrative. I started documenting everything. Every client complaint, every missed deadline, every questionable decision. I kept a detailed record with timestamps, emails, and witness accounts. I reached out to my professional network, people I'd worked with over the years at other companies, former clients who'd moved on to new ventures. I updated my LinkedIn profile and started having coffee meetings. Not job interviews exactly, just conversations. The response was overwhelming. Apparently, my reputation in the industry was much stronger than I'd realized. Multiple companies expressed interest in bringing me on board, some even offering to create positions specifically for me, but I wasn't ready to leave just yet. There was something else I needed to do. I scheduled a meeting with the board of directors, going over Richard's head completely. This was risky, potentially career suicide, but I'd already been demoted, so what more could they do to me? I prepared a presentation that laid out everything: the declining client satisfaction scores since the restructuring, the revenue projections that were no longer being met, the team morale issues that were causing talented people to update their resumes. I didn't mention the affair directly, that wasn't my place, and I didn't want to seem vindictive, but I presented cold hard facts about business performance. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. The night before, I barely slept. I rehearsed my presentation over and over, anticipated every possible question, every challenge they might throw at me. I thought about backing out at least a dozen times. What if this backfired? What if they saw me as a disgruntled employee just causing trouble? But then I'd remember Alexandra's smug smile, Richard's dismissive tone, and all the times I'd bitten my tongue and swallowed my frustration. The morning of the meeting, something unexpected happened. Marcus, my former assistant who'd been reassigned to work under Alexandra, came to my reduced office space, barely more than a cubicle now, carrying a manila folder. He looked nervous, kept glancing over his shoulder. He told me he couldn't stay quiet anymore. That what was happening wasn't right. Inside that folder was a goldmine. Emails between Richard and Alexandra that were definitely not appropriate workplace communication, expense reports showing lavish dinners and hotel stays charged to company accounts, and most damning of all, evidence that Alexandra had been given access to confidential client information before she was promoted. Information she had no business seeing at her previous level. I sat there staring at this folder, my hands actually shaking. Marcus told me that other team members knew he was coming to me, that they wanted me to fight back because they were tired of watching incompetence be rewarded while hard work was punished. He said they missed having me as their leader, that the department was falling apart without proper guidance. It was the first time in weeks that I felt like maybe I wasn't alone in this fight. The board meeting started at 2 p.m. I walked into that conference room with my presentation materials, the documentation I'd compiled, and Marcus's folder tucked safely in my bag. There were 7 board members present, including Margaret Chen, the company's original co-founder and Richard's mother. She'd stepped back from daily operations but still maintained significant influence and owned 40% of the company shares. I'd always respected Margaret. She was sharp, fair, and had built this company from nothing with her late husband. I delivered my presentation exactly as I'd practiced. I showed them the metrics, the client feedback, the financial projections. I explained how the sudden restructuring had disrupted established relationships and workflows. I was professional, composed, sticking strictly to business impacts. Then came the questions. One board member, an older gentleman who'd been a friend of the founder, asked me point blank if I thought personal relationships were influencing business decisions. The room went silent. This was the moment I had to decide how far I was willing to go. I took a deep breath and said that I wasn't comfortable speculating about anyone's personal life, but I did have documentation that raised questions about whether company policies were being followed consistently and fairly. Then I opened Marcus's folder. I showed them the emails, not the romantic ones that still felt too invasive, but the ones where confidential client information was being shared inappropriately. I showed them expense reports that didn't align with any legitimate business purpose. I presented evidence of preferential treatment that violated the company's own HR policies. Margaret's expression grew darker with each page I showed them. The other board members started asking their own questions, requesting copies of my documentation, cross-referencing dates and dollar amounts. The meeting that was scheduled for 1 hour stretched to nearly 3. At one point, Margaret excused herself and made a phone call. 20 minutes later, Richard was called into the conference room. I'll never forget the look on his face when he walked in and saw me sitting there with the board, all my documentation spread across the table. What followed was uncomfortable to witness, even though he absolutely deserved it. Margaret, his own mother, questioned him directly about the decisions he'd made, the expenses he'd approved, the policies he'd violated. Richard tried to deflect, to justify, to minimize. He claimed I was just a disgruntled employee making trouble, that Alexandra was genuinely talented and deserved her promotion. But the numbers didn't lie. Client retention was down 18%, team productivity had dropped significantly, and those expense reports, he couldn't explain those away no matter how hard he tried. The board asked me to step outside while they deliberated. I sat in the waiting area for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kept thinking about what would happen next. Would they fire me for going over Richard's head? Would they dismiss everything I'd shown them? Would this all be for nothing? Part of me wondered if I should have just taken one of those job offers and walked away from this whole mess with my dignity intact. Finally, after almost 2 hours, Margaret came out and asked me to come back in. The expression on her face was unreadable. I walked back into that conference room on shaky legs, preparing myself for whatever was coming. Margaret gestured for me to sit down, and then she said something I absolutely did not expect. She thanked me for bringing these issues to the board's attention. She said that difficult conversations were necessary for the company's health, and that I demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity and commitment to excellence that they valued. Then came the real shock. Effective immediately, Alexandra was being terminated for accepting a position obtained through violations of company policy and for possessing confidential information she had no authorization to access. Richard was being placed on administrative leave while a full investigation was conducted into his management decisions and use of company resources. And I was being reinstated not just to my former position as senior director, but promoted to vice president of client relations, a newly created position that would give me more autonomy and a seat in executive leadership meetings. I literally couldn't speak for a moment. I just sat there trying to process what I was hearing. Margaret continued, explaining that the board had been concerned about some of Richard's decisions lately, but hadn't had concrete evidence to act on. My presentation had been the catalyst they needed. She admitted that the company had failed me by allowing the initial demotion to happen without proper oversight, and this promotion was partly an acknowledgement of that failure. The next few days were surreal. Word spread through the office like wildfire. I came in the following Monday to find a congratulatory email from HR announcing my new position, along with details about my new compensation package that was honestly more than I'd ever imagined making at this company. My old team, the people I'd mentored and worked alongside for years, came by one after another to congratulate me. Some of them actually had tears in their eyes, saying how relieved they were that things were being set right. Alexandra cleaned out her desk that same day. I happened to be walking past when she was leaving, carrying a box of her belongings. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw something there, maybe embarrassment, maybe anger, probably a mixture of both. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy. She'd made terrible choices, but she was also young and had allowed herself to be manipulated into a situation that destroyed her professional credibility. But that sympathy was fleeting. She'd known what she was doing, had enjoyed watching my demotion, had benefited from a system that rewarded connections over competence. Richard's investigation took several weeks. During that time, Margaret stepped back into a more active leadership role, and I got to work rebuilding what had been broken. The first thing I did was meet with every member of the client relations team individually. I listened to their frustrations, their concerns, their ideas for improvement. I reached out to clients who'd been unhappy, personally apologized for the disruption, and worked to rebuild those relationships. It was exhausting, but also energizing in a way I hadn't felt in months. The investigation ultimately found multiple violations of company policy. Richard had misused company funds, shown clear favoritism in violation of HR guidelines, and created a hostile work environment through his actions. The board decided not to terminate him immediately. He was the founder's son after all, but he was required to step down as CEO. He was given a ceremonial title with no real power and strongly encouraged to consider it a graceful exit strategy. He left the company entirely about 6 months later. Looking back now, almost a year after that terrible Tuesday morning when my world fell apart, I can see how much I've grown from the experience. Being demoted was devastating, humiliating, one of the lowest points of my professional life. But it also taught me things about myself I might never have learned otherwise. I learned that my value wasn't determined by my job title or what one person thought of me. I learned that sometimes you have to risk everything to stand up for what's right, even when the outcome is uncertain. I learned that real power comes not from position or connections, but from competence, integrity, and the willingness to fight for yourself. My team is thriving now. We've not only recovered the clients we lost, but brought in several major new accounts. Last quarter, our department exceeded revenue targets by 32%. More importantly, we've built a culture based on merit and mutual respect, where people are promoted because they've earned it, not because of who they know or who they're sleeping with. I make sure to mentor the younger employees, to give them opportunities to grow and shine, to create the kind of environment I wished I'd had during those dark weeks of my demotion. I still think about that morning sometimes, walking into the office expecting just another Tuesday, and instead having my career derailed. I think about how close I came to just accepting it, to updating my resume and slinking away quietly. What if I hadn't documented everything? What if Marcus hadn't found the courage to come forward with that folder? What if I'd been too scared to request that board meeting? My life would be completely different now. The biggest surprise through all of this wasn't the promotion or the vindication, though those were certainly satisfying. The biggest surprise was discovering a strength in myself I didn't know I had. For years, I'd played by the rules, kept my head down, worked hard, and assumed that would be enough. The demotion shattered that illusion, showed me that sometimes playing by the rules isn't enough when other people are willing to break them, but it also showed me that integrity and truth still matter, that documentation and facts can overcome politics and connections, and that sometimes taking a risk is the only way forward. I've had people reach out to me since then, other professionals who found themselves in similar situations, asking for advice. I always tell them the same thing: document everything, build your network before you need it, know your worth, and never be afraid to fight for yourself when you know you're right. I also tell them that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you professionally can become the catalyst for the best thing. I'm in a better position now than I ever would have been if Richard hadn't demoted me. The demotion forced me to evaluate what I really wanted, to stand up for myself in ways I'd never had to before, and ultimately open doors I didn't even know existed. As for Richard and Alexandra, I heard through the grapevine that they didn't last much longer as a couple after they both lost their positions. Apparently, when the relationship wasn't forbidden and exciting anymore, when they were just two unemployed people dealing with damaged reputations, the spark fizzled out pretty quickly. I don't take any pleasure in that, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't see it coming. Relationships built on deception and poor judgment rarely have solid foundations. The experience changed how I lead too. I'm much more aware now of power dynamics in the workplace, of how easy it is for those in charge to abuse their position, intentionally or not. I make sure my team knows they can come to me with concerns, that speaking up won't be punished. I've implemented more transparent promotion processes and regular feedback systems. I never want anyone on my team to feel the way I felt during those weeks, watching someone less qualified take credit for their work, wondering if their dedication even mattered. My final answer to Richard's demotion took everyone by surprise because I didn't just walk away quietly like he expected. I didn't accept the injustice or let anger consume me. Instead, I gathered evidence, built my case, and went through proper channels to address what was wrong. I fought back with professionalism and facts rather than emotion and drama. And in the end, the truth was powerful enough to not just restore what I'd lost, but to elevate me beyond where I'd been before. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's simply refusing to let someone else's poor judgment define your worth or determine your future.